But basically, where do we think Drone Logic sits? Is it his best work, or is it more likely to be swamped by rising sea levels in the next few years? I'm going to give a quick overview of his discography for those that maybe aren't totally familiar. So Avery's released 2 solo albums, Drone Logic and then Song for Alpha in 2018. And earlier this year, he also released another full-length record, but that was a collaboration with Alessandro Cortini from the 9 Inch Nails. And he's also released 2 remix and B-side albums. For the sake of the Apex argument, Jamie, I don't think that we should be considering his remix and B-side albums, as good as they are, purely because they aren't strictly all his own work.
Yeah.
And whilst I respect the fact he's made an ambient album and chosen to kind of develop that side of his sound, I don't think it's on the same level as Song for Alpha and Drone Logic. So the big question is, which of those 2 albums do you think is his peak?
Okay, so I'm going to preface this by saying I don't have the level of emotional attachment you do to Drone Logic or Daniel Avery generally. So maybe I can claim a level of objectivity that you can't. I'm not sure. Someone else will have to be the judge of that. But for me, a month ago, if you'd asked me this question, I would have said Drone Logic without any hesitation. Because I'd only really listened to Song for Alpha a couple of times when it came out and I wasn't particularly blown away. Listening back to it a lot more over the past week or so, I think that album is great. I think it's more mature, more sophisticated. It has a more spacious kind of feeling to it. Whereas I think with Drone Logic, it's quite club ready and utilitarian. Song for Alpha is a lot more meditative, I suppose. So even though it's more, less banger orientated, whatever you want to say, I think it's a more sophisticated album. But I'm not necessarily ready to say it's better because I have a lot more fun, quote unquote, listening to Drone Logic. What do you think initially based on that?
I find it really interesting that you've said it's more meditative because from what I understand, that kind of comes back to the process behind making the albums.
Okay.
So when he was making Drone Logic, apparently for the majority of the time he had Room 1 Fabric in his mind, like these songs are going to knock in the club.
Yeah.
Whereas when he was making Song for Alpha, he kind of viewed his studio time as a release and a bit of like a downtime from the hectic weekend. So he's playing all these mad gigs around Europe, and then when he comes back to the shipping container, it's almost like, take a breath, release. And I think that's where the softer sounds come from. There is definitely like still a nightclub element to Song for Alpha. Like, I mean, Diminuendo, for example, I think
is
his
heaviest
like
song ever, right?
Mate, that is crazy. And, and interestingly, the Luke Slater remix of that on the B-sides album, I somehow makes it even heavier. Like, I don't understand how that's physically possible, but the guy managed it. Look, I mean, as you say, I have something of an attachment, nostalgic attachment. So maybe, as you say, I'm not the most subjective person. I really, really like Song for Alpha, but I still think Drone Logic is his best album so far.
See, this is I think the most important thing. I think it's probably a bit hasty for us to say that the apex of Daniel Avery's career is his debut that he made. I'm not sure how old was he. He wasn't. He was
in his 20s. Yeah,
it's his absolute apex. I would expect and maybe hope if his career becomes, not maybe on the level of an Andrew Weatherall, but his career continues to develop, that maybe he'll have an album that comes in the future that really is the one that people think, wow, this is going to be a seminal record in the canon of electronic music to come. Because I think the way he's been developing so far suggests that is quite possible. Yeah,
I mean, so let's say, are we going to agree that Drone Logic the peak for now, but we're entering uncharted territory where he could climb even higher?
I would say the tectonic plates are grinding away to make a fucking forced geographical analogy. Yeah.
Geography GCSE coming through strong.
Bosh.